Hello learners, I am Dr. Sunita Dhal, faculty with the School of Gender and Development Studies, IGNOU. Today we are going to discuss about research design, its definition, components, steps, and what are the types of research design a researcher is expected to design depending upon different kinds of research. With this, I welcome all of you to the session. And this particular session will be useful for our learners who have registered under MA program in Women's and Gender Studies, and it is a part of a very important part not only of your project work but also the course MAWGSR, that is Research Methods. So with this, let's have a discussion on the definition, what is the meaning of research design. And I'm sure that many of our learners might have gone through the self-learning materials of MAWGSR and they have understood what is research design. So in simple sense, or in as a layperson's language, research design is the layout of your research, or it is the blueprint of your research. When I am talking about the blueprint of your research, which means it can consist of, or it comprises of epistemology, methodology, and method, and also the data collection and data analysis tools. So why do we need research design? So it is, the research design is very much important because it organizes the research. It draws a logical coherence between epistemology, methodology, method, and its tools, so that we can not only select an appropriate research problem, but at the same time we can select methods or tools of data collection and data analysis to address the research problem accurately. So with this brief background, let's know how do we understand research design. So research design refers to the overall strategy a learner chooses to integrate the different components of the study or project work in a coherent or logical way. It ensures that a learner will effectively address the research problem. So if supposedly we do not have a research design, do you ever think that we can arrive at a conclusion? We may arrive at a conclusion, but that conclusion may not effectively address the research problem or the hypothesis which we initially had taken or had developed at the beginning of our research. Research design also constitutes the blueprint for the collection, measurement, and analysis of the data. What is the purpose of research design? It enables you to effectively address the research problem logically and unambiguously as possible. So, without a research design or without having a blueprint, there can be abstraction or ambiguity in the conclusion or to address the research problem. Therefore, the research design is important. It enables you to obtain information relevant to the research problem. For example, in social sciences, it helps you to collect type of evidence needed either to test a theory or to evaluate a program or to accurately describe a phenomena, like defining meaning related to an observable phenomena. So if when we are talking about observable phenomena, let's talk about gender violence. So how gender violence was conceptualized, and now how we can look at gender violence. So there could be operational definitions, and there could be multifaceted ways where we can explore the forms and nature of gender-based violence. Also, we can define what are the forms, or where we can identify these forms are the contemporary ways, and it can be included, or it can be defined as gender-based violence. And before we go to the components of research design, so when we are talking about components of research design, research problem, hypothesis, review of literature are part. But before that, what are the steps that one can actually follow in the research design? So the step starts with the identification of the research problem, like what is the research statement of your study, then formulation of hypothesis, review of literature, so that you can find the actual gap in the review of literature. And when you identify the actual gap in the review of literature, there you can develop, or any researcher or any learner for their project can develop the objectives of the research. Then you turn those objectives as research questions. Based on the research question, the next step a learner or a researcher can follow the sample selection, because there is a universe. From the universe, you can't take the entire population or the universe for your research study. Therefore, selection of sample is important. Then the tool identification of appropriate tools of data collection and the tools for data analysis, then interpretation of result and discussion. So these are different steps which need to be followed while designing any kind of research or a project proposal. So what are the key components of a research design? That a research design must have these components. The first is identifying the research problem clearly and rationalize the selection of a particular topic. It has to be rationalized, which means the topic needs to be scientific in nature. And in terms of the way I say scientific, which means that it should have the relevance not only in the contemporary time, but also why there is a selection of a particular topic, which means either we are going to relook at the existing research, or there is some gap which had already identified by the researcher through review of literature, and therefore a new body of knowledge that your research can throw light or can contribute. And therefore, the selection of research topic and its rationalization are important. Review and synthesize previously published literature associated with the research problem. Third is clearly and explicitly specify hypothesis, that is research question, which is central to the research problem. So once, in the initial, at the beginning of your research, you can identify an area. But area could be very broad, and therefore it is important for us to narrow down that area into the research question. What is the central theme within which the researcher is going to do the research? Effectively describe the data which will be necessary for an adequate testing of the hypothesis, and explain how such data can be obtained from the field, or if the data will be, can this data be a primary data, or it can be a secondary base of data. If it is a primary base of data, then is it going to be, the research is going to be a qualitative research or quantitative research or mixed methodology we are going to use it, or an empirical base of research? And if it is a secondary source of data, then is it based on certain text? Then how do we do selection of certain text for our research? So on and so forth. And lastly, describe the methods of analysis to be applied to the data in determining whether or not the hypotheses are true or false, because formulation of hypothesis is a very significant factor of any research. And therefore, what are the methods which can actually analyze the data so that it can validate or testify the hypothesis? And therefore, describe the methods of analysis to be applied to the data in determining whether or not the hypothesis which had been formulated for this particular research is true or false. Types of research design. So do you think that research design is universal? No. The steps, you could see that steps may be universal, right? Beginning, identifying the research problem, formulation of hypothesis, sample selection, selection of tools of data collection and tools of data analysis, and conclusion. But when it comes to designing any particular kind of research. So it depends on what kind of research that a researcher intends to do. So there are many kinds of research, but today in this session we are going to only focus on some of the key research designs. So first is action research design. This is collaborative in nature and adaptive research design used in work or community situations. So as I said, it is collaborative in nature. Why collaborative? Because if every action research is done by doing an intervention in the community. When you are doing an intervention, it is very important to understand that community is one of the key stakeholders of research, because it is going to impact their lives or livelihood completely, with your intervention. Design focuses solution-driven research outcomes. So when, action research is initiated, when there is a solution to a problem could be needed, and therefore it is important that it is a solution driven. So the outcome can be a theory, but however the outcome is more so solution practical oriented in nature. When practitioners use action research, it has the potential to increase the amount they learn consciously from their own experiences. Why experiences become important here? Because you are having a dialogue with the community, and therefore the experiences of doing research can allow the researcher or the practitioners to bring a change in the research design to be able to get the desired result. The action research design can be regarded as a learning cycle also, because not necessarily what you had designed initially will give the appropriate outcomes for the community, and therefore it is a learning cycle. Action research studies often have direct and obvious relevance to improving practice or advocating for change. There are no hidden controls or preemptions of directions by the researcher, because there are no hidden control. There is no control group here, because here the intervention is going to be done with the help of the community or the group for which the research is particularly designed, and therefore the outcome or the result of the research can be manifested by through seeing the social changes or the transformation or the economic transformation, social, cultural, so on and so forth, or the scientific transformation. Case study design. So as you see the presentation, so which means case study design, that the name itself signifies that you are working on a particular case. So the it approaches complex issues through detailed contextual analysis. So case study normally a researcher takes when there is a complex issue. So sometimes what happens that somebody in women's and gender studies, if someone is working on women's health, or how does women's health impact motherhood, so one can actually work on a particular case to understand the whole construction of motherhood and its relationship with women's general health or well-being. And therefore, a complex issue, you need a detailed analysis or detailed study of a particular case, and therefore a particular case has to be selected on the basis of a particular context. Why there is a rationalization? You have to give the rationalization of selecting a particular case for this study. A researcher using a case study design can apply a variety of methodologies. So the tools of data collection can be participant observation, not participant observation, but it can be in-depth interviews, it can be unstructured interview, open-ended interview, but certainly one can actually also observe the case while she or he or they are in the field doing the research. Design can extend experience and add strength to what is already known through previous research. Social scientists in particular make wide use of this research designed to examine the contemporary real-life problems. The case study design can provide detailed description of specific and rare cases. For example, health and illnesses. And I gave the example of motherhood, construction of motherhood. Many of our MA students have used case study method to study the whole question, the whole notion of motherhood in the contemporary context. Even the whole question of illness, health and illness, and how do we construct health and well-being. What are the issues related to mental health and exclusion of women from the construction of mental health. So these are some of these examples I can cite. Next is causal design. So it is more experimental in nature. As the title says, it is causal, which means that there is a relationship between variables, independent and dependent variable. So the key principle of causal research design is empirical association, which means conclusion is drawn or based on finding an association between independent variable and dependent variable. And therefore, you have to have the control group as well as a particular time, like appropriate time order. To get the causal relationship, one must see that causes were exposed to variations in the independent variable before variation in the dependent variable. So, first the intervention will be there in the independent variable so that its impact can be seen on the dependent variable. And the last component is non-spuriousness, which means where a relationship between two variables that is not due to variation in the third variable, which means there is an extraneous variable, however, it doesn't impact the relationship or the association between independent and dependent variable. So it is an empirical, there is an empirical association, and therefore it is experimental in nature. Then we come to cohort design. Normally for an MA dissertation, normally we do not advise our learners to design cohort design, but if you are working with some civil society organization, research organization, international bodies, policy making bodies, so then you may be part of the entire team, and then you can think of designing a cohort research design. What is that? That could be an open cohort studies or closed cohort studies, where particularly it impacts even the health research, the research in health and biomedicine. It can be designed with the help of cohort research design. So open cohort studies is studying the dynamic population, such as the population of any state, involve a population that is defined just by the state of being a part of the study in the question. So it can study the population. However, the same population can be monitored, but not necessarily that it is open, which means not necessarily the limited number of population could be studied for this particular design. And closed cohort studies is static population, such as patients entered into a clinical trial, involve participants who enter into the study at a defining point of time, and therefore during that period of time the population can be, or the sample or the subject can be studied. So these cohort research designs are very important, but it is particularly used in health research. I may give the example of like COVID vaccines also, that if you would like to study the impact of any vaccine or immunization on a particular population of a particular state, then one can think of designing a cohort research design. Then next comes to the cross-sectional design. And this is also when there is a team involved, then it is imperative for any team of researcher to design a cross-sectional research. Cross-sectional studies provide a clear outcome at a specific point of time. So here time is important, and this design focuses on studying and drawing inferences from existing differences between people, subjects and phenomena under study. Groups identified for study are purposely selected based upon existing differences in the sample rather than simply selecting with the help of random sampling. So, groups are identified, and the particular groups have been identified depending upon their differences, so that the cross-sectional study can be designed. So cross-sectional study we can't design if your population or the groups have the similar characteristics. So there has to be the variations among the groups in terms of looking at the intervention as well as the results. Cross-sectional studies are capable of using data from a large number of subjects which is not geographically bounded. So you can do a cross-sectional study in India, so also the same study can be done with a different set of population or with a different set of group in some other parts of the world. Therefore, we can see the difference or the in terms of the results if a particular intervention has been given and at the same time for similar for different kind of groups. However, the results may be different for different groups looking at their socio-cultural, economic, geographical conditions. So cross-sectional studies can go beyond any geography, and therefore normally for MA and for postgraduate or for PhD research, normally researcher or the students do not design a cross-sectional studies. Then we come to descriptive research design, and this is the last part of your session here. And then the next part we are going to take it in at some other point of time. So descriptive design, where I think many of our learners are doing descriptive research design for their MA dissertation. So here the subject is being observed in a completely natural and unchanged natural environment. So why describing a particular phenomena? Here it is very important to observe the phenomena in its own natural environment, like cultural studies could be an example. Descriptive research is often used as a precursor to more qualitative research designs, with the general overview giving some valuable pointers as to what variables are worth testing for quantitative research. So you are describing a phenomena, which means there could be a new trend, there could be a particular group which you are going to explore through descriptive research also, but that could also be an exploratory research design one can always design. But at the same time, descriptive research design is more qualitative in nature. If the limitations are understood, they can be useful tool in developing a more focused study. So why sometimes it happens that before we design a quantitative research, some researchers, they also go and visit the study, they undertake a feasibility study, and feasibility study can be an example of your descriptive research design, because you are describing the phenomena under observation within a particular context, and therefore depending on the report of the feasibility study, one can decide that whether the researcher can follow a quantitative research design or qualitative research design, or it could be a mixed methodology through which the data, the selection of sample or collection and analysis of data can be decided upon. Descriptive studies can yield rich data that lead to important recommendations in practice. Approach collects a large amount of data for detailed analysis. So since the researcher is describing a phenomena, So therefore, it is imperative for a researcher to collect a large segment of data so that a detailed analysis can be drawn, and that descriptive research can enable the future researcher to develop an empirical research or any other forms of research while studying the same phenomena. With this, I conclude my topic on research design, and you could the reference I have entirely taken from Lane in the year 2018, and her work is very important, where she developed an academic writing guide for social science research in University of Gothenburg. So this is a very important source, and it particularly this kind of compendium helps any researcher, like whether it is postgraduate or doctoral research students, any scholars, to do a thorough research or a proper logical research by designing a coherent research design. With this, I thank all of you, and I hope you have enjoyed the session on research design. Thank you.